In order for any Muslim society to develop, it needs to be grounded in the Islamic sciences. And what we see in the development of Islam in different parts of the world are different patterns, right? So, for example, in West Africa, modern-day countries like Nigeria, Niger, Mali, etc., Islam doesn't come to these areas through conquest primarily. It comes to these areas slowly through trade, through iterant preachers over time. And as a result, the trajectory of the Muslim community in these areas is fundamentally different from other areas. And in particular, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, we encounter a situation where Islam is really the purview of the elites. You had a fairly large Muslim population, but the level to which Islam had permeated through society was relatively low compared to other parts of the Muslim world. And coupling that with the development of colonialism and particularly the slave trade, what we have is the rise of a group of rulers known as the Hausa kings, who ruled over individual city-states, and in many cases were nominally Muslim, but were quite oppressive towards their populations, which were also nominally Muslim. So in this context, you have the rise of a scholar and reformer by the name of Usman Fodio, who lives in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And like many of the scholars that came before him, he starts out as a traveling preacher. He goes from town to town, essentially teaching what he knows of the Islamic sciences. But he's particularly interested in reform of the political system. He's interested in kind of changing the way that the people interact with the political authorities to make it more in line with Wahi itself. Obviously, this is a threat to the existing social and political order, so the Hausa city-state kings are quite oppressive towards him, and this ends up leading to a system where he has to now develop a new system of Islamic education in West Africa. And we see the rise of a new form of authority that isn't predicated particularly on the palace. He's interested in creating established madaris that mirror aspects of madaris in other parts of the Muslim world that had already been seen in North Africa, in the Middle East, and in the subcontinent. But it's unique to the social circumstances of West Africa at that time. One of the things that he really emphasizes is the development of what's known as the Ajami script, which is essentially writing the local languages such as Hausa and Fulfulde in the Arabic script as a means of expanding literacy throughout the area. So obviously, due to the fact that this is a threat to the local kings, there's conflict that develops. And we have the development of something that's known as the Sokoto Caliphate, which is led by Usman Fodio. And it's really a new development in terms of the relationship between Wahi on the one hand and political authority on the other, where now authority isn't just vested in the kings, it is also vested in the ulama. So we have a recognition here that the social and political circumstances of West Africa are fundamentally different from other parts of the Muslim world. And Usman Fodio is not simply trying to import something foreign and impose it on the West African population. He's looking towards Wahi as a guide for a framework of how society can and should develop, and he's making that fit into the context that he lives in. Again, this is the interaction between the Islamic content on the one hand, which is universal and unchanging, and the social and political context, which is constantly in flux. So one of the things that he particularly emphasizes is mass education, and not just for men, but also for women. His own daughter, Nana Asma'u, who's a scholar in her own right, pioneers this movement that's particularly interested in education of rural Muslim women. Usman Fodio is very critical of ulama that are not interested in educating women, and he makes this a cornerstone of the educational policy of his proto-state. So throughout the early 1800s, you have the development of this new state called the Sokoto Caliphate, which incorporates Islamic knowledge in a new way that was unseen and ends up really expanding Islam throughout this region in a way that hadn't been seen before. And even with the expanding pressures of colonialism and imperialism throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, the Sokoto Caliphate survives, although it also transforms and morphs over time. It still exists today in the nation-state era in northern Nigeria as a symbol of Muslim unity and this recognition of the importance of Islamic education as the basis of any kind of institutionalization of Muslim society.